On July 27, 2023, there was an accident on the mountain peak known as K2, which is the second highest mountain in the world and widely regarded by many as the most dangerous, earning it the nickname the Savage Mountain. But the accident sparked a fair bit of controversy due to a viral video that surfaced that depicts a series of climbers that can be seen on a trail on a fixed line stepping over the body of a dying man named Mohammed Hassan, who is a Pakistani porter. Now, just to be clear, there is a difference between a porter and a Sherpa. What a porter does is they typically do not have mountaineering experience, and their job is to transport supplies typically to a base camp, an advanced base camp, or perhaps a camp 1, but typically not into the higher realms of the mountain where mountaineering experience is needed. However, Mr. Hassan was being paid a significantly higher fee for his work at the higher camps, and he needed that money for his mother's medical bills. Mr. Hassan was a 27-year-old father, and unfortunately, he was not very well prepared for being up high on the mountain. But nevertheless, at approximately 2:15 a.m., he had fallen from the fixed line and landed about 15 feet down where his rope caught him. Now, just to be clear, what I'm describing here is the most dangerous section of K2, known as the bottleneck. On one side, you have a big cliff, and on the other side, you have what is known as a serac, or a giant block of ice that could fall and kill everyone on the trail at any point. The trail itself is very thin, only big enough for one person to traverse at a time. And because of the danger, the system that they implement is a series of climbers in the front set up what is known as a fixed line, basically a static rope that they can clip into for the people behind, so that if they fall, they only fall a short ways. Mr. Hassan was clipped onto the fixed line, as I understand it, and had fallen at approximately 2:15 a.m. He had fallen about 15 feet, and he was dangling from his harness, and apparently had lost perhaps his gloves and perhaps his oxygen mask, and was essentially incapacitated with his belly showing and his harness tangled up in his knees, basically incapable of hoisting himself back up to the trail. So the next people in the line, who consisted of a team headed by Kristin Harila, who is a mountaineer, they rendered aid to this individual. Specifically, there was a man named Gabriel who was the cameraman, and it seems, as I read many accounts, Gabriel did the bulk of the work and was able to hoist this man back onto the trail. Now, he was incapacitated, he couldn't stand, but he was conscious and living at this time. Harila is a mountaineer with quite a bit of experience, and she was on a quest to summit the world's highest peaks. Specifically, there are 14 8,000 meter peaks, and she was on a quest to do what is known as a speed record, to climb them all in a very quick period of time of 92 days, surpassing the previous speed record previously held. In addition to that, the cost of this expedition was extremely high for everyone involved, and there was a weather window where they did not believe they would have been able to climb on the 28th due to the weather window closing. So there was a significant amount of pressure for Kristin Harila and her team to summit the mountain, particularly for Harila herself, because she wanted to obtain the final summit of the 14 summits that she needed to make this speed record. The accident took place at approximately 8,200 meters, and after Gabriel had hoisted the man back up to the trail, there was a radio call that had came in basically saying that the people on the front of the line, the ones who were setting up the fixed line, were encountering some type of problem. I didn't really understand what this problem was when I read several sources, but for whatever reason, Harila decided at this point that Hassan was in good hands, and she continued to the summit of K2 without rendering further aid. And this is where she received a lot of criticism. Now, to be very clear, this section of the trail where he fell and where the accident occurred was very narrow, perhaps this big across, only big enough for one person to traverse at a time, and they were on fixed lines. So anyone traversing would need to bypass or step over another person in order to continue along the route, which is why on the video you see one man stepping over the dying body of Hassan. To be clear, the person stepping over Hassan's body was not Harila, it was someone else. But in any case, whether you're stepping over a dying body or just continuing to his summit, you're not rendering aid and you're not providing assistance to this man who was dying. Because he was a Pakistani and not a Westerner, there seemed to be a lot of criticism around his nationality and his lack of worth as a human being, or lack of perceived worth, at least I should say, by the expedition and by the individuals who were experiencing what is known as summit fever. Then Harila recorded a video on the summit celebrating her accomplishment, and as Harila came down, at that point, she asserts, at that point she determined that the man had passed away and she realized the gravity of the situation. I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt from Harila's blog here, where she basically describes her account of the story and kind of defends herself against some of the attacks that she received. After describing the events of the accident, she then goes on to say, quote, "We decided to continue forward as too many people in the bottleneck would make it more dangerous for a rescue. Considering the amount of people that stayed behind and that had turned around, I believed Hassan would be getting all the help he could, and that he would be able to get down. We did not fully understand the gravity of everything that happened until later." So, it is at this point where she basically has made the decision to continue towards the summit, and that she asserts in this section of her blog that she believes at that time that Hassan would be able to get down with the individuals who stayed, with the help that he had there, which consisted mostly of Gabriel, because every other person you can see on the video had passed him by stepping over his body. Not just on that video, but another video of a drone camera that was taken by another third party also showed Gabriel, it appears to be Gabriel, who appears to be either providing compressions or rubbing his body in some way, providing some type of aid, while everyone else in the line continues along and ignores that man entirely and focuses their entire attention on summiting the mountain of K2. It is true, there was quite a bit of people on the mountain who could have provided aid, but the path was so narrow that you have the problem of too many cooks in the kitchen. And so I can understand how when you compound all these things together, the extremely high altitude, the oxygen masks, the lack of concentration due to the inability to really process the situation, the belief that other people perhaps are going to render aid when you believe the person experiencing the trauma is fine, or is going to be fine. At least that's what Harila asserts in this section of her blog. At that time, she believed that Hassan was going to be fine because there was so many other people that were there that it appears to me that she assumed that because there was other people there, those people would render some type of aid and she would be able to continue along her quest for her speed record to climb all 14 of the 8,000 meter peaks. But you know, the thing is, when I read this, she seems to contradict herself a little bit. Because then she goes on to say, quote, "It was only when we came back down that we saw that Hassan had passed, and we were ourselves in no shape to carry his body down. You need 6 people to carry a person down, especially in dangerous areas. However, the bottleneck is so narrow that you can only fit 1 person in front and 1 behind the person being helped. In this case, it was impossible to safely carry Hassan down." So when I read this excerpt and the excerpt before it, on one hand, she says that she believed he would be fine because there were so many people there. And she believed that he would be able to, quote, "get down." And I'm going to read. "And that he would be able to, quote, get down." And then on the other hand, she says, in this case, it was impossible to safely carry Hassan down. So which one is it? Is it possible or is it impossible to carry Hassan down? Because I can see why she asserts that in this section of her blog, because at that time, it provides her with an opportunity to abandon the man, to continue to the summit, to achieve her egotistical goal. And then upon arriving at his dead body, at that time, then it's impossible to carry him down because the line is too narrow. You need 6 people. It's just impossible. So she seems to be contradicting herself in her own assertions on her own blog. On the one hand, saying that she believed other people were rendering aid and that he would have been fine, but on the other hand, saying that he was a lost cause and there was no way for anyone to help him and get him down. Now, irrespective of whether or not it is possible to get this man down, I would like to take the moment to kind of explain the difference in what is known as alpine style climbing and expedition style climbing. When I was a kid, I was enamored with climbing, specifically Mount Everest. And I watched all the documentaries and I read all the books, Into Thin Air and all that stuff. And my perception of climbing had always been around the expedition style, which is basically where you go up, you set up a base camp, you set up a camp 1, you stock supplies with Sherpas, and porters rather, and you come back down from camps, you go up from camps, you stock them, you have a cook, you have a mail service, you have a tailor, you know what I'm saying? You basically have a city. And then after you summit the mountain, you leave all your trash behind, and then you tell your news to the world and you say, what a great person I am. That's the expedition style climbing. And as I really started getting into the spirit of the outdoors more, I started to understand that I was gravitating much more towards the alpine style. If you want to know a really good movie that exemplifies alpine style climbing, you should watch Touching the Void, which introduces a very similar ethical conundrum that both characters have to face. But I think it really illustrates the difference, and I'm not going to give away the movie because it's such a great movie. I mean, in my opinion, it's the best mountaineering movie ever made. But it really illustrates the difference between putting forth an effort to try to save someone as much as you can versus just focusing your attention on give me that summit at all costs. And I think when I look at these expedition style climbs, what I see is not a spirit of helping your fellow man when he's in need, a spirit of give me that summit, me. My ego is more important, my speed record. Let me say a little bit about the speed record aspect, okay? This whole notion of a speed record is something that is completely ridiculous in my opinion. Now there are even some well-known famous climbers who I love and respect, Dean Potter being one of them, who are obsessed with speed records. If you ask me, I say speed records are stupid, okay? So suppose you climb a mountain in 3 hours and 45 minutes. Who cares? Okay, I'm going to organize the parade, you call the mayor, I'm going to contact the national organization of people who don't care, and we'll get a medal going for you. Why? Why do you care about how fast you climb a mountain? That's not the reason you should be climbing. You should be climbing to go to the summit and experience the beauty of these places. But as you see in my videos, I never approach any climb with the intention of summiting at all costs. I always say this is going to be an attempt. Because you have to understand, in the back of your mind, you don't know what's going to happen. You could encounter an injured person along the way. You don't know whether or not you're going to have to radio that person out. You don't know whether or not you yourself are going to get injured. You don't know whether the weather is going to turn on you. You don't know what's going to happen. And so you can't approach these mountains with the mindset of, I'm going to summit no matter what. I mean, when you see a video of a man stepping over a living human being's body and continuing to the summit without any regard for that human being, even if it's hard to carry him, even if you have no oxygen, still the perception and the guilt that would be in my mind of doing something like that is beyond comprehension. There is no way your conscience is ever going to let you forget that. Now, here's the thing though. You might be saying, how would you get an injured man down a mountain like that on such a precarious path? Well, you have at least 10 people there. All you gotta do is hook one guy's harness to the back of the next guy, and that guy's harness to the next guy, to the next guy, and you have a line of 10 guys who can pull that body while another one holds him up and basically pushes him. I mean, it's not impossible. If everybody abandoned their plans of the summit and everybody focused their attention on carrying that injured man down, even if he failed, even if he died, still the knowledge of knowing that you tried and that you did something would at least give you the solace of being able to sleep at night. But when you see that video and you see those people, they just go and they don't even look at that guy, they just step over his body and they just keep going. You know, I tried looking at this story from many different angles and I said to myself, Joey, are you just being judgmental? If it was you, would you have gone forward and climbed that mountain? You know, especially if you had spent $50,000 or $100,000 or whatever the cost is, and it's the only time of your life you're ever going to get to do it. Guys, listen, I love these mountains, but I don't love them that much, okay? There is nothing in this world that I love that much that I'm not willing to let go, including mountains, including summits. And I think if you start approaching these mountains in that light, you start to value them too much. And I think you shouldn't value anything that much, except for human life. I mean, how can you put a price tag on a human life? Is a Westerner's life worth more than a Pakistani's life? Is a Sherpa's life worth more than a porter's life? I'm just going to close this video real quick from a reading from one of my favorite books. And it is known as the DSM-5, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. This is page 760. This page describes a condition known as narcissistic personality disorder. Diagnostic criteria: a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. 1. Has a grandiose sense of self-importance, e.g., exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. 2. Is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. 3. Believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or associate with other special or high status people or institutions. 4. Requires excessive admiration. 5. Has a sense of entitlement, i.e., unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. 6. is interpersonally exploitive, i.e., takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. 7. Lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. 8. Is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her. And 9. Shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes.